Welcome to the Professional Women's Wellness Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Peggy Gleason, creator of the Mindful Eating Approach, where I help professional women and business owners with a tailored path to weight loss and self-confidence without the stress of restrictive diets, time-consuming exercise regimes, or medications. I help you transform your eating habits to enhance all areas of your wellness. And we always offer inspiration, motivation, and education with amazing gifts. And we have an unbelievable special guest coming back to us. Oh my gosh, he was so awesome last time he was here. And he is going to talk about the mitochondria as it relates to food cravings. Now, we're going to learn about the mitochondria. This is pretty cool because I haven't done this since college. So, Dr.
Really?
Shay,
Okay. Oh,
um,
right.
the actual lessons about what it is, right? I think it's
Okay.
so awesome. Dr. Shay is a chiropractor, functional medicine practitioner, and he solves health puzzles for the busy, health conscious moms, mompreneurs, and adults with Asperger's to help them break away from their survival mode so that they can get back into the community. So, Dr. Shay, would you like to start? Because I can't wait to see what you have to say now.
So just to ground it in like learning about the mitochondria, for some of you in listening or watching, you're like, okay, well, what is the mitochondria and what's the point? If you understand what the mitochondria is, it can explain a lot of things that people will be struggling with, including not being able to navigate their emotions, having excess negative emotionality in their day-to-day life. It's related to fatigue, it's related to pain, related to headaches, related to nearly every single chronic disease that you may be dealing with or see a loved one or down the road you may have inherited that genetic fault line to experience. It can be traced back to mitochondrial failure in some way. So the mitochondria is 10% of your body weight. 10% of your body weight is the mitochondria. Now, it's not an organ, it's 10% of the cells. 10% of the inside of each cell is
Mhm.
mitochondria. So what a mitochondria is, it's the electricity factory. It's the thing that generates electricity. It's technically called ATP. That's what we have
Yeah.
watts here, but it's called ATP in the body. It stands for adenosine triphosphate for the Scrabble enthusiasts listening. And
Yeah.
uh, so ATP is electricity. Now, to give you a sense of the importance of the electricity, imagine like my grandparents lived in New York City for decades. And now imagine if the electricity went out in New York City. So your cell is a city. Your cell is a microscopic three-dimensional city. Imagine electricity went out in New York. It would take about 3 days before it turned into Mad Max.
You
Right?
think that long?
I'm being generous. Um, in New York, actually, this is true. I actually had a discussion with. I've lived in many different parts of the states. I lived south of the Mason-Dixon line. I lived north of the Mason-Dixon line. I've lived in California. I lived in Colorado. I've lived in another country. Like I've actually lived in many different places. And then when I have a lot of friends south of the Mason-Dixon line, and they're like, "Oh God, these Yankees are so." They're so in your face, and I'm like, yeah. And when there's an emergency, they step up. Like they
Yes,
step
yes,
up.
they
So
sure do.
I
I'm a
think,
proud New Yorker. I'm a
yeah,
proud
I
New
think,
Yorker.
New York would last actually longer than 3 days. Los Angeles, not so sure. Uh, um, the so if a city or even your house lost electricity for a long enough period of time, it breaks down. Like it becomes this empty shell that's actually problematic. And so what happens is that if you lose electricity, you start having to burn garbage in the streets and and breaking down furniture to keep things warm and to get a little bit of light and a little bit of heat. So you have these backup mechanisms to keep warm and to be able to eat, get energy from cooking food, and even if you're burning garbage in the streets. And these metaphors are really useful because they actually translate perfectly to the cell. So your mitochondria are those electricity factories. And if they break down, your cell breaks down and has to go into emergency garbage burning in the streets mode, meaning that you can't take fuel that would normally go to the factory to be burned for electricity. Now you've got to like inefficiently burn it in the streets. So for example, the mitochondria takes three sources of fuel. It takes amino acids, fatty acids, and sugar, and it burns in the presence of oxygen to create ATP. The whole point of us breathing is to provide that oxygen, like oxygen fuels a fire. You can't just light a fire without oxygen. You need wood and oxygen. So same thing. If you the mitochondria will take 1 unit of sugar and make 36 units of energy and no smoke. Now, for the biochem nerds, the liver makes 38 units. Everyone else makes 36. We're not going to go there, but just acknowledge how awesome you are at biochemistry. Congratulations. Moving on. So just think 36 units of energy per unit of glucose. That's very important to keep in mind because that number is going to be very important later on. And no smoke. Smoke in this case is lactic acid. Lactic acid is that chemical that if you work out really hard, you feel that burn in your muscle. It's the same chemical that people with fibromyalgia suffer with. They have lactic acid buildup in their muscles, but nothing to show for it. They didn't get it from exercising. So what happens is that if the mitochondria is not working, if it's broken or vandalized or something's wrong with the trucking company delivering the fuel, or there's not enough oxygen, whatever, it's not working, that molecule of glucose now has to be burned like garbage in the street. It's built in what's called the anaerobic pathway, the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the streets, mitochondria is the factory. Aerobic or air burning is the mitochondria uses oxygen. Without oxygen, if you can't use the mitochondria, it's the only place you can use oxygen. So then if you can't use it, it's now the anaerobic or non-oxygen burning part of the metabolism. So you take that same molecule of sugar without oxygen, has to be burned in the streets like garbage. You only get not 36 units of energy, you get 2. Plus 2 units of energy, 2 units of smoke. So you get 1/18, because 2 times 18 is 36. You get 1/18 the amount of energy, and you get 2 units of smoke. So if your mitochondria are broken down long enough, and all you can do is burn sugar, you're going to be tired and in a lot of pain. Because of lactic acid. That's what we call fibromyalgia.
Wow, that's a great explanation for people out there who are suffering from fibromyalgia, because a lot of people, they just don't understand it on that kind of level, but it makes so much sense. Makes so much sense.
So then you look at, why is the mitochondria failing? And that's a very complex set of reasons, which I'm going to share my screen and distill down into as simple a language as I can possibly do it. So to the left is the complicated chemistry. It's not even showing the molecules, just showing the names of it. So basically, the mitochondria, if you keep in mind, it's a factory that has to have stuff delivered to it, and the factory burns things, and you got to make sure that you got all the machinery and the conveyor belts working, and you got the staff to clean up any sparks or mess, and you have security systems to keep out vandals, and you got a garbage delivery system to get rid of all the toxins and the muck that's in there, and you got to have phone calls into the head office to let them know how much electricity to burn or not burn, and you got to have engineers to turn up and down the factory. That's basically it. And everything I just said has a biochemical correlate, every single one. So we'll start from the top. You need oxygen. So that's the whole point of red blood cells. You carry oxygen, you're breathing, and the oxygen is delivered. Okay, but the oxygen is only useful if you have fuel to burn it alongside or with it. So there are 3 fuel sources: fats, carbs, and proteins. Each of these 3 fuel sources has a separate truckers union that you have to pay off. Okay, you pay them in different currencies. So the protein amino acid truckers union is paid mostly in B6. The Carbohydrate Truckers Union is mostly paid in other B vitamins, magnesium, lipoic acid, a little bit of chromium in there to sweeten the deal. You need different currencies to pay the Carb Truckers Union. The Fatty Acid Truckers Union requires B2, carnitine, magnesium, and glycine. So if you are deficient, if you are missing a currency, Union ain't going to be happy, and it's going to leave the stuff on the docks. Sorry. So now you can see where these vitamins and nutrients come in to even get the fuel to the factory, to even deliver it. You have this entire swath of B vitamins, minerals, and a couple of the nutrients to even get the fuel for delivery. So right away, we've named like a dozen or so nutrients, right? Just before it even gets to the factory, it's a dozen. Now you've got the structural integrity of the factory itself, which requires a special types of fats called sphingolipids. You got amino acids involved, you got the fats involved. So you've got like the structural integrity of the mitochondria. Then of the factory. So inside the factory, you now have machines. Those machines are called vitamins. At the center of each machine is a computer chip. That's called a mineral.
Okay.
So now heavy metals are a problem because they're bad chips. So imagine taking a 2024 MacBook M3 computer and it requires an M3 computer chip, and you take a 1990s Apple computer chip and stick it in there. That computer is not going to work well, if at all. So that's what heavy metals do. Heavy metals are bum computer chips that screw up the function of the machines. That's the best analogy I can think of. And I can't even remember who taught it to me. I wish I did.
I think that's a great analogy. Are you kidding? Now we're all going to remember.
So you have to have good functioning machines. You have to have good computer chips. You got to have a good conveyor belt. That's CoQ10. CoQ10, when you look at it structurally, it's enormous. It is a gigantic molecule. Only people really say this with pride. Only people who are truly nerds have like really gone into look at the structure of some of these things. CoQ10 is this enormous conveyor belt, and to which it's like sandwiching like between like the mitochondrial membranes. And if you understand it as a conveyor belt, then you understand just how important it is. You need CoQ10 in order for you to process the whole thing inside the factory, to feed through the machines, etc. Then you've got the problem with burning fuel in the presence of oxygen is you make sparks, just like a fire. You make sparks. Sparks are bad because they can light things on fire that you do not want on fire. They're very, 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 very bad. These sparks are called free radicals. That's what they are. They're free radicals. So now you got to have a small army of janitors running around called antioxidant enzymes to mop up and deal with these free radical sparks. So you've got three janitors. You got a head janitor named MN Sod, who I lovingly call Mr. Sod. Like Mr. Sod, the janitor. MN stands for manganese. Again, for you Scrabble enthusiasts out there. Not magnesium, manganese. Then you've got another one called GPX1 and CAT, which stands for glutathione peroxidase and catalase. It's not important, but just know that there's a head janitor and there's two sub-janitors. And if you have, this brings it back to our discussion we had earlier about genetics. Yeah. If genetically you have a slow set of janitors like me, I am much more, or if you have, or if anyone listening has it, you have much more risk of having damaged mitochondria from an inability to put out the sparks, therefore burning holes in your factory, which means a higher risk for fatigue syndromes, higher risk of pain, higher risk of all these chronic diseases and issues. So if you know your genetics, then there's specific things you can do to strengthen and support and mobilize your janitors so your mitochondria are less prone to being burned down from the inside. So that's the janitors. Then we have viruses, which are thieves and vandals, that can come in and co-opt the mitochondria or just simply destroy it for fun. And that's where viruses and infections would come in. Then you've got toxic chemicals affecting the mitochondria. This is like sludge that's gumming up the machines and screwing up, literally gumming up the machines. It's a slightly different mechanism than heavy metals, but it's the same. They're taken out of commission, like they're slowed down or stopped completely. Then you've got your liver detox capacity, which is your garbage removal system. Like you need sulfate. So I mentioned on the slide, Dr. Lord's most important mark. So Dr. Richard S. Lord, he's the PhD that invented half, if not more, of all the functional tests that are used today in functional medicine. So he's the one who invented the GI-FX tests, the ion panel. He's the one who invented, organic acid testing for functional use, amino acid testing, fatty acid testing. He recently came out of retirement to train Dr. Kalish, who was my instructor for 4 years. And I was there actually when he came out of retirement. So I actually had some lectures with watching.
Wow, that's so exciting.
And he republished his magnum opus and updated it in 2020 or 21. It's called Laboratory Guides to Health. It's a 1,200-page digital book on Apple Books, going through. This is for the clinicians. This is not for the lay public to read. This is way beyond look. If you memorize this book, you'll win every Scrabble tournament imaginable. But aside from that, that's the only benefit if you're not a non-clinician. So, but he said that sulfate was one of the most important markers because it could track your detox capacity. So then there's neurotransmitters. Now, neurotransmitters are the signals, because cities talk to each other, right? Like New York isn't in isolation from Boston or Chicago or Philadelphia or any of the other suburbs or whatever. So if you have poor communication between cities, then cities provide things for other cities. Then there's communication breakdowns, and so that's a problem. And then that affects your mitochondria. Then the inflammatory markers are if you've got inflammation in general is how flammable is your factory as a whole. So genetically, going back to genetics again, if you are genetically prone, if you're a hyperinflamer like me, then your mitochondria are more flammable. So doing things to make you less flammable is a very good thing when it comes to mitochondria. Then thyroid. So the mitochondria is the business. I learned this from Dr. Kalish. The thyroid is the business end. Sorry, the mitochondria is the business end of the thyroid. The mitochondria is the business end of the thyroid. So everyone talks about thyroid. That checks your basal metabolic rate. But no one ever explained what that actually was. That's actually how much ATP is generated by your mitochondria. That's what that is. So What happens is that T4 is the four-wheel car that leaves the thyroid, and it goes into the bloodstream highway, and it just drives around till it pulls over into the parking lot of a mitochondria of a cell, and then it does the transformer thing like the movies, burp, 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 and it becomes this T3 engineer, and it button mashes on the control panel to dial up its speed in which the mitochondria burns fuel for ATP. So the reason this is important is because there's a lot of people listening, I guarantee, that have been gaslit by some endocrinologist saying your thyroids are fine, stop complaining about literally all the symptoms of hypothyroidism.
Oh my goodness, you are so right. And I have run into so many people that have said, but my thyroid, an endocrinologist, but my thyroid was fine. And darn well, it's not fine.
But it may not even, the thyroid actually may be fine, but it's the mitochondria that's malfunctioning.
Right. But that's not known to them, right?
Exactly. So the engineer can button mash all he wants, but if the factory is broken, then the button mashing won't help. That's why it falls on deaf ears. That's why the thyroid signal isn't working, and you can have normal thyroid, but the signs of hypothyroidism, because the end organ of the thyroid is the mitochondria to actually make the effects. So when you look, and then you also have to look at, someone also may have show the signs of, low mitochondria, but when you test their mitochondria, the mitochondria is fine. But if you forget to test the thyroid and you realize it's actually a signaling issue, that the engineer isn't showing up for work to turn on the mitochondria. So it can go both ways. So that's why ideally you test both at the same time. You test thyroid and mitochondria together. So this is how to best. Oh, one other, I forgot to put this on the thing. Stress. So how does stress shut down the thyroid? So the analogy is, stress, the adrenal, like cortisol, your body's is either in long-term health, healing, growth, repair, or it's in survival. And so the thyroid and adrenal are those correlates. The thyroid is really for long-term health, healing, growth, repair. Adrenals for short-term survival. So here's the kicker. If you're under acute stress, whether it's from a threat, real or perceived, whether it's a deadline or you're in danger or whatever it might be, your body will shut down the mitochondria and focus on generating as much ATP as quickly as possible at whatever expense is needed. Now, burning fuel in the mitochondria in that factory is very slow but extremely efficient. 1 molecule of glucose, 36 units of energy, no smoke. The same amount of time it takes to process 1 molecule of glucose for 36 units of energy and no smoke in the mitochondria, you can burn about 100 units of glucose in the streets like burning garbage. You can burn it very quickly. So do the math. If we do the math, it's 2 units times 100 is 200 units of energy. For the same amount of time, you get 36. Now, if you're under a threat and emergency, kind of don't care if you're burning garbage. Kind of don't care, because you got to get out of that emergency.
That's right.
So the burning the garbage in the street has a real purpose and in a real emergency to generate as much ATP as possible, smoke be damned. So what happens is that if your adrenals are overactive, if you're stressed out for whatever reason, then your mitochondria are going to shut down because it thinks it's in survival. Not necessarily because the mitochondria is broken. It's just being told the priority is speed of production, not efficiency and cleanliness of production. And to bring it into kind of a real world example, when the Germans were bombing London in the raids in World War II, London was on a lot of stress. So it told everyone to cut their lights. So they're cutting the mitochondria. The analogy is not perfect, but it's visual, like it's visceral. People remember
visually you can get it. Yeah.
So you cut, because you're under massive stress. You cut your power down. You cut down the electricity factory. That's the way to remember that. That's the real image of it. You cut the electricity factory and you just live off of candles, because then the danger can't see you. The bombers can't see you. So that's how to understand the mitochondria and why what do you do to help the mitochondria? It's like, well, it really depends on what's going on. Is it a vitamin deficiency, whether it's from paying off the truckers unions to running the machines in the factory? Is it a fatty acid issue where the structure of the mitochondria, you need amino acids for building mitochondria and for fuel in the mitochondria? Is it a mineral issue? Is it a heavy metal issue? Is it a CoQ10 issue? Is it an antioxidant issue? Is it a viral issue? Is it a liver detox capacity? Is it a toxic chemical? Are you having the wrong signaling? Is you overinflamed? Is it a thyroid something? Is it oxygen? There's so many different things that are involved. That's why mitochondria testing is really involved. I studied how to do this for 4 years with Dr. Kalish. Like it is non-trivial to actually analyze someone's mitochondria test. It's not trivial at all. Especially when you take into context everything else that's going on that affects the mitochondria.
Oh, wow. So what I'm interested in is I know a lot of my clients that come to me, they want to lose weight and they have poor eating habits. And I'm wondering, as far as the mitochondria and emotional eating.
Yes.
How can you connect that?
Okay. Excellent question. So there's a couple ways that mitochondria and emotional. So mitochondria connects to emotional eating in one way, and it connects to metabolic addiction and cravings in another way.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start with the emotional. So just some background. I had for 8 years I was a functional neurologist with the Carrick Institute. I gave up on that diplomate, one, when I transitioned to virtual only, and two, my personal mentor was the president of the neurology board, but he died suddenly in 2017, and I just lost my heart in neurology.
Oh.
He died, and
Mm.
I just couldn't do it anymore because I was just so heartbroken, and I was switching to it's hard to do neurology through Zoom. Until they make that haptic suit, it's hard to do neurology through Zoom. Um,
Yeah.
so so I have a really big background in neurology and functional neurology, and the reason I bring that up is that to understand the brain, you have to understand mitochondria, because the brain runs on mitochondria. It cannot function off burning garbage in the streets. The nerves require 20% of all of your calories is burned in the brain, which is only 2% of your body weight.
Think about that, guys. Think about that. Say that again.
1/5 of all your calories is burned in 1/50th of your body weight.
Imagine that. Wow.
So you have to have and the problem is you have too much lactic acid and it'll die. Like it is very fragile. So you've got to have your mitochondria running. Now, the part of the brain that is the most fragile and most vulnerable to mitochondrial dysfunction or breakdown or whatever, any of these lists of failures that I just listed that are possible, are the frontal lobes.
Okay.
So if your frontal lobes aren't working so well, you're careen back into your mammalian brain, and you're just in your emotional self. So your frontal lobes have what's called prefrontal inhibition of the emotional centers. Your frontal lobes inhibit your more animalistic evolutionary switches of survival, okay, and emotional bursts. So if you have poor mitochondrial function, I mean, for example, people who have one of the infections that's in the constellation of Lyme and the associated co-infections called Bartonella, and there's that's what's called Lyme rage. People with Bartonella can have Lyme rage, and the infection affects the brain in a certain way, and you can get super aggro. People who have mitochondrial dysfunction, they get more emotional, therefore they can emotionally eat more often.
Okay.
And if you have mitochondrial dysfunction in the brain, you certainly have mitochondrial dysfunction everywhere else, which means that then leads into the metabolic component of why people who have mitochondrial problems can have cravings metabolically. So this is a real case of mine. This woman was really just constantly eating sugar, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't tolerate fat. Like, it made her ill. It just made her feel awful. And she didn't want to eat sugar, but she had to in order to stay functional. And she was just a mess, and her blood sugars were going crazy and all the rest of it. And so what we did is we tested her mitochondria, and we found that her carnitine shuttle was completely jacked up. This is the truckers union that shuttles fat. Mm-hmm. So she was missing the ability to burn 1/3 of all possible fuel sources in the mitochondria. So her body was like, okay, we just need to push the sugar pathway really hard because we can't use fat.
Yeah.
So she was craving sugar. This was a real craving. It was not an addiction, because metabolically she needed the sugar because she was missing this other option. So when we addressed the fatty acid shuttle system, she was then able to start metabolizing fat and drop sugar down. And so she's not dealing with this sugar cravings anymore, because it was a real craving that we solved the cause of the craving.
Isn't that amazing? Wow.
So there's other reasons people can also be metabolically craving sugar. One is there could be mineral or vitamin deficiencies, which relate to what we just talked about. In her case, it was the carnitine shuttle, which required carnitine and B2, and if it's a longer fatty acid, it needs glycine. So called the long haul truckers. The long haul truckers also need To be, the nerdy jokes go even further. So glycine is an amino acid. I guess it's to buckle up. Just wait. Okay, so glycine is an amino acid. It tastes sweet like sugar. Literally, I recommend it to people to use it as sugar substitute.
Wow.
Yeah, glycine powder, just straight up pure glycine that looks and tastes exactly like sugar. And glycine is
Awesome.
super important. It's a component for bile. It's a structural amino acid. It's one of the three amino acids to make glutathione, like one of the most important molecules in the body.
Oh, absolutely.
Glycine, glutamine, and cysteine for sake of completion. Those are the three amino acids. So the long haul truckers, the long chain fatty acids require glycine. So you literally have to give the long haul truckers glycine to sweeten the deal. To see,
Oh, I like
see the
that. I
analogy.
like that.
This is how I entertain myself, Peggy.
Oh, yeah, I can
This is
see
my
that.
world. Okay. Okay. All right. So
You're clearly a visual person.
clearly,
You're,
or I just have a thing about truckers. I don't know, but whatever.
yeah.
So, they run America. I love them. Anyway, so they basically are the ones that make all of our economies work. So the truckers union analogy is really helpful because when stuff gets stuck on the docks, then everything downstream gets affected. Now, with vitamins and minerals are when you're deficient in vitamins and minerals. Now, pregnant women realize this. They start craving things that are just bizarre, like buckets of ice cream or eating dirt or whatever. It's their body is craving nutrients, but the body doesn't say, "Oh, I need to eat B6. I need to eat carnitine." The body knows to crave the food in which those things are in. So if people are craving sugar, then we only got sugar as hunter-gatherers from honey, and from ripe fruit and certain tubers that were sweet enough.
Mm-hmm.
So the deal with ripe fruit is that the tree will ripen the fruit and put sugar and minerals and nutrients and water and vitamins when it's ripe. If it's unripe, it tastes bitter and could be toxic to you. And so the tree will signal to you that the fruit is ready to be eaten by changing the color of it. And that's when you know it's the sweetest and it tastes the best, because that's also most nutrient dense. Because the coevolution with fruit-bearing trees and mammals that eat fruit, whether it's human or otherwise, is that the tree will say, like, I'm going to make this nutrient sugar, this mineral, vitamin, calorie dense treat for you that will secretly Trojan horse my seed and hope you don't chew up and destroy all the seeds, so that when you walk away and poop, you'll take my seeds will be in a pile of manure far away from me, the tree. So that's the deal that you make with the tree, or the mammals and fruit-bearing trees have struck a deal over the course of evolution. So if you're craving sugar, you may not be craving the sugar, you may be craving the minerals and vitamins and nutrients in the fruit itself. But the body doesn't know to crave, magnesium. It knows to crave whatever thing is, or vitamin C. It's going to crave the apple or whatever it is. So if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, your body, due to nutrient deficiencies of one type or another, you may start to crave certain foods, including sugary foods that sugar right now is basically hijacking the taste. The craving for sugar has been hijacked by the food industry. That's what's happened. And in fact, there's a scientist that worked for Coca-Cola that figured out called the bliss point. I mean, this is a technical term. Have you heard of this?
Yes, I've heard, but you can go on. Explain it to the audience.
Yeah, so the bliss, I think it was in I can't remember what documentary it was on, but you can look this up. It's called the bliss point of sugar. So basically, it's an exact amount of sugar that is sweet enough to trigger all of basically the addiction, cocaine-like experience in the brain, but not too sweet that it's aversive to the taste buds.
Right.
And that's called the bliss point. And that's a scientifically proven thing. there's documentaries on it. I think That Sugar film, I think it was That Sugar film. It was a really hilarious film, by the way. It came out of Australia. That's one to watch. And I think they interview the guy who invented the bliss point. And he's so proud of himself, even though he's responsible for the early death and demise and suffering of hundreds and hundreds of millions of people with chronic diseases from this stupid sugar formula that all the big companies now co-opted. So he's got blood on his hands, but he's just so proud of his precious little discovery. He's just,
Oh my
it's
gosh.
kind of sad, really. I mean, you can get
It
angry,
is,
but
it is. So it's called the bliss point. I'm going to remember to look that up myself. That should be very interesting.
so so metabolically, when people are craving things, they may be doing it because they're missing nutrients, or they could be doing it emotionally because their brain is literally stuck in some sort of animalistic survival mode because they don't have enough mitochondria to keep the frontal lobes going.
Okay. So, like you look at someone who may have lost someone. They may have
Yes.
been either divorced or lost a loved one. And as you look at that, and of course, they're going to sit and they don't get satisfied either. They just don't. It's almost like I always looked at it as they're filling a void, correct?
Yeah, so sugar has multiple emotional tethers.
Hmm.
So evolutionarily, sugar was rare, therefore was celebrated as such. So sugar, over just the sheer inertia of time,
Hmm.
sugar became associated with celebration, only like birthdays,
Sure.
holidays. I mean,
Yeah.
only the worst Boulder mom ever would give out broccoli on Halloween, you know. So it's um the so sugar became emotionally tethered to celebration, fun, excitement, even a little bit of mischievousness, or kind of, you know, and you're a grandparent, or you're an auntie or an uncle or whatever, and you bring sweets to, you're the one who brings all the foods you're not supposed to have, but it's okay because
All
grandma's.
the goodies. Yeah,
Yeah.
all the
So
goodies.
it becomes associated emotionally and culturally with celebration and fun, um, and joy. And so emotionally eating, when you're feeling sad or depressed, is you're basically injecting temporary joy by the association of the flavor of sweet with all the other positive memories that were tethered to it growing up.
That's a wonderful explanation because I know there are so many people that I work with, as well as I'm sure many of our listeners will relate to that. Like, why do I keep doing it? And if you think of it rationally, not that we're all rational when we're depressed, but it does make sense.
Well,
Yeah.
I was a former sugar addict. I mean, deeply, for over 15 years. And
Wow.
so I truly understand. Like, the one things that I could control that brought me some modicum of joy amidst all the gaslighting at home and violence at school
Mm.
was the taste of sugar, or the hypnotic allure of screens, whether it was television or playing video games.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's where I
yeah.
had agency. It's where I could actually choose to have a positive experience, even if it's at the expense of my health with sugar or my sleep with TV and video games. It's sugar was very real anesthetic, very real anesthetic to me.
That
And
makes sense. It does. You were numbing yourself with sugar.
correct.
Wow. So if someone wanted to find out how to find out about their functions and their metabolic parts and all the things all the tests that you do as a functional uh, um,
Practitioner.
practitioner, thank you. I need a drink of water. Um, how would they get in touch with you?
You just go to my website. There's a lot of resources on my website. There's a couple ebooks available. There's one on genetics. There's some on the 10 pillars of health, which is my model for analyzing people's lifestyle. And, at the time of this recording, I'm still doing just application calls for people that may be shifting to later on to more it's more like group interviews or just having programs for people to just slot into. And I have office hours model for people who want to do genetics, a DIY for genetics, and there's other options for people who want to do functional testing. And the key thing about if anyone's like if anyone listening to this is wanting to work with someone who's skilled in functional testing, this is a general advice for anyone listening, whether uh, they're interested in working with me or someone else. This will help anyone. Number one, functional testing is based off of lifestyle. So you want to make sure that whoever you're working with will actually do the job of analyzing lifestyle as opposed to figuring out supplements for symptoms, and so you want to make sure that you have your lifestyle analyzed first. There's a caveat with the genetics because the recommendations from the genetics are what they are based on the genetics because your genes don't change. So what your lifestyle was before, you just have to adapt to whatever your genetics say. So knowing what your lifestyle was before doesn't necessarily change the recommendations of the genetics because those remain the same. But the functional testing does because that's such a moving target. Genetics will tell you, there's a distinction between genetics and functional testing. I think this may be an important caveat. Genetics will tell you what is your ideal, but it will also tell you where your genetic fault lines you inherited are that you need to shore up. What it won't tell you is the thumbprint of what's going on right now. That's what functional testing is. The functional testing will tell you what are your amino acid levels now, what are your fatty acid levels now, what are your thyroid levels now, what's your adrenal cortisol levels now, it'll tell you like what is happening now. The genetics tells you what is your ideal, where's your ideal you need to aim at, and what are the fault lines you need to shore up. So there are two different windows into your health and well-being. Both are extremely valuable, but they're different. Genetics, anyone can just do at any point in their life.
Sure.
Functional testing requires a lot more. It's a little bit harder to do because you got to like pee in this and poop in that and spit in that and get your blood drawn. All it's an inconvenience. And there's also usually like a bigger investment because it's a lot more complicated in terms of tying in all like. Instead of looking at just 110 markers for genetics, you're looking at, for me, it's like up to 1,000 if you're including like Lyme testing, Lyme mold, environmental toxins, all these different things from gut markers and hormones and mitochondria and anemia and bloods, all sorts of stuff. So for people that are interested in functional testing, it's a slightly different road to go down than just doing genetics. And the investment is worthwhile in terms of long term, because if you know what you actually need to do based on data, it will save you a lot of time and energy and frustration by pointing in the right direction and getting your diet and nutrients and lifestyle going in the right direction based on data. But there is a big initial investment for really good practitioners to analyze really complicated functional labs. And these are not labs that you can get from normal Western medicine.
No.
So I just want to, like, it's an investment and it saves money long term. Short term, it's not cheap necessarily. And I just don't want people to walk in naive as, and not everything is covered by insurance either. Like not everyone's an insurance practitioner. Like I'm not, and it's just a different approach to health. Now, the way that I reconcile sometimes there's a financial barriers for people to enter into genetics testing and functional testing. The way that I reconcile that is I educate widely for free, podcasts, summits, free ebooks.
Oh, how generous.
So
that's wonderful.
So I just generate tons and tons of free content, including stuff on lifestyle and just understanding these bigger, like if you're understanding the mitochondria like we covered today, I can pretty much guess 99% of everyone listening to this has never heard the mitochondria explained that
That
clearly,
way.
yeah, false modesty aside, that's probably the clearest explanation of mitochondria you've ever heard.
Oh, it is. It
So
is.
so that is tremendous value. So now people are armed with information. They can go get other actual books and read. Now they're more empowered. So that's how I reconcile the financial barrier for many people in investing. Is also the genetics side of it is less of an investment than the functional side of it. Simply, also just over time, because you just need to take the test once and you're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would encourage people to just understand that going down the functional testing route is one route. Genetics is an easier route, and I think more in terms of finances, a better investment over the long term because you just do it once and you're done. But I'd really just want to make sure people don't walk in naive.
No, I'm glad you explained that. But whenever I hear concerns about investment when it comes to health, I often say, and especially at least getting the genetics done, with that knowledge and knowing that it'll point you in the right direction on your lifestyle and your eating and everything else. What's the cost if you don't take care of your health? It's huge. It's a huge,
Enormous.
huge burden. Um, and to me, when you have something like genetic testing or functional testing, I've done both. Um, I've had functional testing done recently, and it was so worth it because I learned about me, not in a comparison to everyone else. So I would recommend everyone to go to Dr. Shay's site, and you want to tell them what it is?
www. Yeah, sure. It's www.drsamshay.com, drsamshay.com. And there's there's ebooks available there. There's more information there. At the time of this recording, I'm still doing individual application calls. And I also have a YouTube channel. You can put in Dr. Sam Shay into YouTube. You can put it into Spotify. You can put it into podcasts. You can put in Dr. Sam Shay comedy into YouTube and see my comedy set list.
Yeah,
as well.
now I have to go to that. That's going to be my first place to go. Check out the comedy. No, it's so exciting. And to think these things are available for all of the listeners, it's available for everyone to go and learn. Who are you? What's your chemistry? What's your genetics? What's the best lifestyle you can have? I would highly recommend you connect with Dr. Shay. And thank you so much. I'm filled with gratitude for your presence today, being on this podcast. And I'm sure we'll see you again.
Okay. Thank you so much. It was great to chat.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening and supporting the Professional Women's Wellness Podcast. If you would like to attend training sessions by our amazing podcast guests and have a chance to connect, join the Professional Women's Wellness newsletter. For more details and to sign up, scan the QR code or click the link in the description. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast. Each week, we will select a reviewer who will receive free access to my $197 course, Goodbye Night Bites, a 30-day journey to stop emotional eating at night. Please subscribe to get notifications of future episodes.